Hola, ¿cómo están? Les voy a leer una carpeta que se llama Esquivando las balas, pero ahorita me estoy primero comiendo un pan de ajo con extra mantequilla, mientras que calentamos motores. Está delicioso, ¿eh? Una rebanada de pan de ajo, tiene crema de ajo embarrada, está deliciosa y con extra mantequilla en líquido que se le puede poner como spray. Y está delicioso. ¿Lo desayunaron? ¿Qué desayunaron? Unos huevitos bañados con algo o así solos. Voy a poner la música acá mientras que me como mi panecito. Hola. Sean todos bienvenidos. Vamos a con la carpeta número 3. Esquivando las balas. Bueno, pues qué rico estaba el pan, la verdad, qué delicia. Eso me tocó con un huevito. A rato voy a hacer uno con un huevito. Ok. Esquivando las balas. Fear setting and escaping paralysis. A false step was made by standing still. A false step was made by standing still. Name must your fear be before vanishing you can. Name must your fear be before vanishing you can. Rio de Janeiro, Brasil. Como saben, este libro es de economía, estamos hablando de economía. Dodging bullets significa esquivando las balas. Vamos a ver de qué se trata esta historia. Rio de Janeiro en Brasil. 20 feet and crossing. Run, córrele. Hans didn't speak Portuguese, but the meaning was clear enough. Whole ass. His sneaker gripped firm on the jagged rock. He drove his chest forward toward 3,000 feet of nothing. He held his breath on the final step, and the panic drove him to near unconsciousness. His vision blurred at the edges, closing to a single pinpoint of light, and then he floated. The all-consuming celestial blue of the horizon hit his visual field an instant after he realized that the thermal updraft had caught him in the wings of the paraglider. Fear was behind him on the mountain top, a thousand of feet above the resplendent green rainforest and pristine white beaches of Copacabana. Hans Killen had seen the light. That was Sunday. On Monday, Hans returned to his law office in Century City, Los Angeles, post-corporate haven, and promptly handed in his 3-week notice. For nearly 5 years, he had faced his alarm clock with the same dread. I have to do this for another 40 to 45 years. He had done a sleep under his desk at the office after punishing half-done project, only to wake up and continue on it to the next morning. That same morning, he had made himself a promise: 2 more times and I'm out of here. The strike number 3 came the day before he left for Brazilian vacation. We will make the promises to ourselves, and Hans has done it before as well, but things were not somehow different. He was different. He had realized something while arcing in slow circles toward the earth. Risks weren't that scary once you took them. His colleagues told him that what he expected to hear, he was throwing it all away. He was an attorney on his way to the top. What the hell did he want? Hans didn't know exactly what he wanted, but he had tasted it. On the other hand, he did know that what brought him to tears, and he was done with it. No more passing days as the living dead. No more dinners where his colleagues compared cars, riding on the sugar high of the new BMW purchase until someone bought a more expensive Mercedes. It was over. Immediately, a strange shift began. Hans felt, for the first time in a long time, at peace with himself and what he was doing. He had always been terrified of plane turbulence, as if he might die with the best inside of him. But now he could fly through a violent storm, sleeping like a baby. Strange indeed. More than a year later, he was still getting unsolicited job offers from law firms, but by then had started Nexus Surf, a premier surf adventure company based in the tropical paradise of Florianopolis, Brazil. He had met his dream girl, a carioca with caramel-colored skin named Tatiana, and spent most of his time relaxing under palm trees of treating clients to the best times of their lives. And this was he had been. Is this what he had been so afraid of? These days, he often sees his former self in the underjoyed and overworked professional he takes out on the waves, waiting for the swell. The true emotions come out. God, I wish I could do what you do. His reply is always the same: you can. The setting sun reflects off the surface of the water, providing a sunlight setting for a message he knows is true. It is not given enough to put your current path on the indefinite pause. He could pick up his law career exactly where he left off if he wanted to, but that was the farthest things from his mind. As they paddled back to the shore after an awesome session, his clients get a hold of themselves and regain their composure. They set foot on shore, and reality sinks in funks. It's funksing. Reality sinks is funksing. I will, but I can't really throw it all away. He has to laugh. Cuenta la historia de un señor, pues, de un señor que ya estaba harto de su trabajo, ¿no? Que pensaba siempre hacer lo mismo por 40 años, que se le hacía como un pinche masacre, ¿no? Como estar esclavizado para siempre. Dice que un día decidió dejar todo y se fue a Brasil, a una playa, y allá vivió el resto de su vida feliz y contento debajo de las palmas, acostado. Y dijo que si él puede, tú también puedes. The power of pessimism, defining the nightmare. Action may not always bring happiness, but there is no happiness without action. La acción no siempre puede tener felicidad, pero si no hay acción, no hay felicidad. Benjamin Disraeli, former British Prime Minister. To do or not to do. To try or not to try. Most people will both know whether they consider themselves brave or not. Uncertainty and the prospect of failure can be very scary noises in the shadows. Most people will choose unhappiness over uncertainty. For years, I set the goals, made resolutions to change direction, and nothing came off either. I was just as insecure and scared as the rest of the world. The simple solution came to me accidentally 4 years ago. At that time, I had more than I knew what to do with. I was making 7,000 K or so per month, and I was completely miserable. Worse than ever, I had no time and was working myself to death. I had started my own company, only to realize it would be nearly impossible to sell. Oops! I felt trapped and stupid at the same time. I should be able to figure this out, I thought. Why am I such an idiot? Why can't I make this work? Buckle up and stop being such an insertive expletive. What's wrong with me? The truth was nothing was wrong with me. I hadn't reached my limit. I reached the limit of my business model at the time. It wasn't the driver, it was the vehicle. Critical mistakes. Ya llegó el correo. Critical mistakes in its fancy will never let me sell it. I could have magic levels and connected my brains to a supercomputer. It didn't matter. My little baby had some serious birth defects. The question then became, how do I free myself from this Frankenstein while making it self-sustaining? How do I prepare myself for the tentacles of workaholism and fear that it will fall to pieces within 15-hour days? How do I escape this self-made prison? A trip I decided, a sabbatical year around the world. A sabbatical year around the world. Uf, qué chingón, eh? So I took the trip, right? Well, I get to that. First, I felt it prudent to dance around with my shame, embarrassment, and anger for 6 months, all the while playing an endless loop of reasons why my out fantasy trip could never work. One of the more productive periods for sure. Then one day, in my bliss of envisioning how bad my future suffering will be, I hit upon a gem of an idea. It was surely a highlight of my don't happy, be worried face. Why don't I decide exactly what my nightmare will be? The worst things that could possibly happen as a result of my trip. Well, my business could fail while I'm overseas for sure. Probably will a legal warning letter will accidentally not get forward, and I will get sued. My business will be shut down, and inventory will spoil on the shelves while I'm picking my toes in solitary misery on some cold shore on Ireland. Crying in the rain, I imagine my bank account will crater by 80%, and certainly my car and motorcycle in storage will be stolen. I suppose someone will probably spit on my head from a high-rise balcony while I'm feeding food scraps to a stray dog, which will then spook and bite me squarely on the face. God, life is cruel, hard bitch. Life is cruel, hard bitch. ¿Quién piensa que la vida es cruel? Es cruel. ¿Ustedes creen que la vida es cruel? ¿Por qué creen que la vida es cruel? ¿Qué les ha hecho la vida? ¿Por qué piensan que la vida es cruel? ¿Tienen algún motivo o alguna razón? Ok, ¿dónde me quedé? Ok. Conquering fear, defining fear. Conquistando el miedo, definiendo el miedo. Set aside a certain number of days during which you should be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough thread, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I fear? Then a funny thing happened. In my undying quest to make myself miserable, I accidentally began to backpedal as soon as I could through the back and ease and ambiguous anxiety by defining my nightmare, the worst case scenario. I wasn't worried about taking a trip. Suddenly I started thinking of simple steps I could take to salvage my remaining resources and get back on track if all hell struck at once. I could always take a temporary battering job to pay the rent if I had to. I could sell some furniture and cut back on eating out. I could steal lunch money from the kindergarteners who passed by my apartment every morning. The options were many. I realized it wouldn't be that hard to get back to where I was, let alone survive. None of these things will be fatal, not even close. Mere tiny pinches on the journey of a life. I realized that on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being nothing and 10 being permanently life-changing, my so-called worst-case scenario might have a temporary impact of 3 or 4. I believe this is true of most people and most well be, holy shit, my life is over. Disasters. Keep in mind that this is the 1 in a million disaster nightmare. On the other hand, I realize my best case scenario, or even a probable case scenario, it will easily have a permanent 9 or 10 positive life-changing effect. In other words, I was risking unlikely and temporary 3 or 4 for a probable and permanent 9 or 10. and could easily recover my baseline workaholic prison with a bit of extra work if I wanted to. This all equated to a significant realization. There was practically no risk, only huge life-changing upside potential, and I could resume my previous course without any more effort than I was already putting forth. That is when I made the decision to take the trip and bought a one-way ticket to Europe. I started planning my adventures and eliminating my physical and psychological baggage. None of my I started planning my adventures and eliminating my physical and psychological budget. I'm gonna underline that because that's exactly what I did too. What I've been doing. Empecé a planear para mis aventuras y eliminar mis físicas y mis psicológicas, mis basuras físicas y psicológicas. None of my disasters came to pass, and my life has begun a near fairy tale since. The business did better than ever, and I practically forgot about it as it financed my travels around the world in a style of it for 15 months. I'm covered in fear, disguised as optimism. I'm covered in fear, disguised as optimism. Descubriendo el miedo, pensado como optimismo. There is no difference between a pessimist who says, "Oh, it is hopeless, so don't bother doing anything," and an optimist who says, "Don't bother doing anything, it is going to turn out fine anyway." Either way, nothing happens. Bon Chouinard, founder of Patagonia. Fear comes in many forms, and we usually don't call it by its four-letter name. Fear itself is quite fear-inducing. Most intelligent people in the world dress it up as something else, optimistic denial. Most who avoid quitting their job certain the thought that their course will improve with time or increase in income. This seems valid, and it's a tempting hallucination when a job is boring or uninspiring. Instead of pure health forces action, but anything less can be endured with enough clever rationalization. Do you really think it will improve, or it is wishful thinking and an excuse for inaction? If you were confident in improvement, would you really be questioning things so? General note: this is fear of the unknown disguised as optimism. Are you better off than you were 1 year ago, 1 month ago, or a week ago, or 1 week ago? If not, things will improve by themselves. If you are kidding yourself, it is time to stop and plan for a jump. Barring any James Dean ending, your life is going to be long. 95 hours working lifetime, or of 50 to 50 years is a long as time if the rescue doesn't come. About 500 months of solid work. How many do you have to go? It is probably time to cut your losses. Someone called it Maître D. You have comfort. You don't have luxury, and don't tell me that money plays a part. The luxury I advocate has nothing to do with money. It can be bought. It is the reward of those who have no fear of discomfort. Jean Cocteau, French poet, novelist, boxing manager, and filmmaker whose collaborations were the inspiration for the term surrealism. Sometimes timing is perfect. There are hundreds of cars circling a parking lot, and someone pulls out of a spot 10 feet from the entrance just as you reach his or her bumper. Another Christmas miracle. Other times, the timing could be better. The phone rings during sex and seems to ring for a half hour. The UPS guy shows up 10 minutes later. Bad timing can spoil the fun. Jean-Marc Hake landed in West Africa as a volunteer with high hopes of lending a helping hand. In that sense, his timing was great. He arrived in Ghana in the early 1980s in the middle of a coup d'etat at the peak of hyperinflation and just in time for the worst drought in a decade. For this same reason, some people would consider his timing quite poor from a more selfish survival standpoint. It had also missed the memo. The national menu had changed, and they were out of luxuries like bread and clean water. Who will be surviving for 4 months on a slush-like concoction of corn meal and spinach? Know what most of us will order at the movie theater. Wow, can I survive? Jean-Marc had passed the point of no return, but it didn't matter. After 2 weeks of adjusting to the breakfast, lunch, and dinner mash a la Ghana, he had no desire to escape. The most basic of foods and good friends proved to be the only real necessities, and what would seem like a disaster from the outside was the most life-affirming epiphany. he'd experienced. The worst really wasn't the bad. To enjoy life, you don't need fancy nonsense, but you do need to control your time and realize that most things just aren't as serious as you make them out to be. Okay, again. Two, you need to control your time and realize that most things just aren't as serious as you make them out to be. The worst really wasn't that bad. To enjoy life, you don't need fancy nonsense. To enjoy life, you don't need fancy nonsense, but you do need to control your time and realize that most things just aren't as serious as you make them out to be. Now, 48. Jean-Marc lives in a nice home in Ontario, but couldn't live without it. He has cash, but could fall into poverty tomorrow and it wouldn't matter. Some of his fondest memories still include nothing but friends and girls. He is dedicated to creating special moments for himself and his family, and he is eerily unconcerned with retirement. He's already lived 20 years of partial retirement in perfect health. Don't save it all for the end. There is every reason not to. Q&A questions and actions. Q&A question and actions. I am an old man and I have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happen. Mark Twain. I am an old man and I have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happen. Soy un hombre viejo y he conocido muchos grandes problemas, demasiados grandes problemas, pero muchos de ellos nunca pasaron. Mark Twain. If you are nervous about making the jump or simply putting it off out of fear of the unknown, here is your antidote. Write down your answers and keep in mind that thinking aloud will not prove as fruitful as a prolific as simply brain vomiting on the page. Write and do not edit. Aim for volume. Spend a few minutes on each answer. So vamos a preguntarles unas preguntas. Escriban la respuesta, no tomen mucho tiempo, no piensen mucho tiempo. Y vamos a ver lo que pasa. Son 7 pasajes, ¿ok? Y preguntas. Vamos a ver. Define your nightmare. The absolute worst case. The absolute worst that could happen if you did what you are considering. Describe tu pesadilla. Lo peor que puede pasar si haces lo que estás considerando. Esa es la primera. What doubt, fears, and what ifs pops up as you consider the big changes you can or need to make. Escribe las dudas, los miedos, lo que pasaría, que te salga si consideras hacer los grandes cambios. Envision them in painstakingly detail. Will it be the end of your life? What will be the permanent impact, if any, on a scale of 1 to 10? Are there things really permanent? How likely do you think is that possible? How likely do you think is it that they will actually happen? ¿Qué pasaría si lo harías, no? ¿Cuál es lo que pasaría? Del 1 al 10, cuenta qué es lo que pasa. Si sería un impacto permanente, ¿no? Si sería para siempre, si sería un tiempo, cuánto tiempo te va a durar, sería el fin de tu vida. La número 2. What steps could you take to repair the damage of getting things back on the upswing, even if temporarily? ¿Qué pasos tomarías para reparar el daño de las cosas que destruiste, aunque si fuera temporario? Chances are it is easier than you imagine. How could you get the things back under control? Puede ser que hasta sería más fácil de lo que te imaginas. ¿Cómo puedes controlar todo para atrás otra vez? La 3. Number 3. What are the outcomes or benefits, both temporary and permanent, of more probable scenarios? ¿Cuáles son los fines, beneficios de los dos, temporalmente? Temporalmente de todo lo que pasaría. Now that you've defined the nightmare, what are the more probable of the definitive positive outcomes whenever internal confidence, self-esteem, etc. or external? What will the impact of these more likely outcomes be on a scale of 1 to 10? How likely is it that you could produce at least a moderate good outcome? Have less intelligent people done this before and pulled it off? Oof. I might get rich. That's what I wrote. Number 4. If you were fired from your job today, what would you do to get things under financial control? Imagine this scenario and run through questions 1, 3 above. If you quit your job to test other options, how could you later get back on the same career track if absolutely have to? Number 5. What are you putting off out of fear? Usually what we most fear doing is what we most need to do. The phone call, that conversation, whatever the action might be. Is it fear of unknown outcomes that prevents us from doing what we need to do? Define the worst case, accept it, and do it. I repeat, something might consider tattooing on your forehead. What we fear doing most is usually what we most need to do. What we fear doing most is usually what we most need to do. As I have heard said, a person's success in life can usually be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations he or she is willing to have. Resolve to do one thing every day that you fear. I got into this habit by attempting to contact celebrities and famous business people for advice. 6. What is costing you, financially, emotionally, and physically, to postpone action? Don't only evaluate the potential downside of action, it is equally important to measure the atrocious cost of inaction. If you don't pursue those things that exact you, where will you be in 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years? How will you feel having allowed circumstance to impose itself upon you and having allowed 10 more years of your infinite life to pass doing what you know will not fulfill you? If you telescope out 10 years and know with 100% certainty that it is a path of disappointment and regret, and if we define risk as the likelihood of an irreversible negative outcome, inaction is the greatest risk of all. No hacer nada es el mayor riesgo de todo. So, ya saben, ya están advertidos para que no digan que nadie les dijo. What are you waiting for? ¿Qué estás esperando? If you cannot answer this resorting to the previously rejected concept of good timing, the answer is simple. You are afraid. You are like the rest of the world. Measure the cost of inaction. Realize the unlikelihood and repairability of most missteps, and develop the most important habit of those who excel and enjoy doing so. Action. Ok. Lo peor que te puede pasar es que no tomar acción. Ok, ya terminó la carpeta. Ya después sigue la carpeta número 4 que se llama System Reset. Como vamos a el cambio del sistema, no vamos a cambiar el sistema. Un cambio de sistema, así se llama. Being unreasonable and ambiguous. Ser irrazonable y ambicioso. Es la siguiente carpeta de la que vamos a hablar. Estamos aquí y los miro en la otra carpeta. Bye.